Good evening, everyone. Good evening. It is, I look around, it is just so good to see the community gathered together here at the Justice Thurgood Marshall Amenity Center at PS 103, the Henry Highland Garnett School. It was the elementary school of Justice Thurgood Marshall, and I could just go down the list: Clarence Mitchell Jr., Carl Murphy, uh, anybody want to raise their hand and they want me to disclose you went here too? I got you. All right. And so we're so happy because this community is historic in every way. This building, that was a $15 million investment in this community, where we are now able to partner with the institutions and collaborate with them. You'll hear about that as we continue on. But we are glad in this that we were able to partner with the law schools in honor of Justice Thurgood Marshall, University of Maryland, Baltimore, University of Maryland. Thank you. Thank you. Howard University, and on and on and on. And for some of us that just graduated, thank you, Lottie. We were happy that this is a place for us as well. So let us pray. We do thank you just for the blessedness of coming together and gathering together in a time that it seemed incredulous. It is a time for us to center down, to focus on that which is important and significant. We understand that in the life and legacy of Justice Thurgood Marshall, he explained to us what equality is. It is getting the same thing at the same time in the same place. So allow us to be advocates for equality throughout everywhere we go. Allow us to remember our legacy, but most importantly, our challenge to make this a perfect union. We ask that you will do it in your name, we pray. Amen.
Good evening. Please join me in once again acknowledging Dr. Hathaway's extraordinary accomplishments with this board. I'm very excited. I'm Andre Davis, and I didn't go to 103, but I went to Booker T. Junior High School up the street, so my heart is here. It was my great honor to serve as the chair of the selection committee for the Justice Marshall Lecture. The idea for the lecture was inspired by Dr. Hathaway's tireless work and was envisioned by Mary and James Miller, assisted by a distinguished committee of lawyers and others, they're listed in your program, as a way to permanently enshrine in contemporary Baltimore and to celebrate the legacy and achievements of Justice Marshall. Today's talk is the first of many to come. Outstanding legal thinkers and activists will be invited annually by a committee of retired judges, legal scholars, and former law clerks of Justice Marshall to help build knowledge and to provide insight into the history and future of our fragile democratic laws and traditions. Traditions that Justice Marshall sought to protect for all Americans. At the same time, the lecture will recognize a child of Baltimore whose work and life changed this country forever, turning the arc of history toward more genuine justice. The lecture will be another way we bring this beautiful building to life. We welcome you and we appreciate your support. So far, 14 law firms and many individuals have supported the creation of the endowment that is necessary to ensure the lecture's enduring success. We hope to have many more attorneys and others from the broader community support our efforts. We hope you and those in your networks will step up to support the lecture and thereby lift up the legacy of Justice Marshall and to help shine a light on our beloved Baltimore. It is now my honor to introduce my dear friend, Sherilyn Ifill, who will introduce General Holder. Sherilyn Ifill is an internationally known civil rights lawyer and activist and scholar who for more than 3 decades has litigated cases on the 14th Amendment and worked on the front lines of human rights and civil rights litigation and in the halls of policymaking institutions. Professor Ifill, who is also one of Baltimore's own, holds the Vernon E. Jordan Distinguished Chair in Civil Rights at Howard Law School, where she leads the 14th Amendment Center for Law and Democracy, a multidisciplinary undertaking that will train and equip law students and lawyers in the development of litigation, scholarship, and public education initiatives focused on fulfilling the promise of the 14th Amendment. As you all know, from 2013 through 2022, Professor Ifill served as president and director counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, where she supervised a team of 50 lawyers litigating civil rights cases. Prior to that, she served for over 20 years as a professor at the Francis King Carey School of Law at the University of Maryland. Nominated by Time magazine as one of the 100 most influential people in the world, she is the recipient of numerous honorary doctorates and other awards. The lecture selection committee was truly blessed and honored to have Sherilyn among our number. I give you Professor Sherilyn Ifill.
Y'all look good. Thank you, Judge Davis, so much. And I really also want to salute and honor Dr. Hathaway. Where are you? This is such an extraordinary labor of love. And for those of us who walked through this building when it was under construction and still a dream, it is just extraordinary to see what you have done. And I know this is going to be a powerful resource for this community. I thank you, Judge Davis, as always, for your extraordinary work. I thank all of the members of the committee, including Mary Miller, because one of the things I love about Baltimore, is that Taylor Branch? One of the things I love about Baltimore is the committed group of people who hold on and honor our history and make sure that we don't lose our history and that we understand our role in the evolution of democracy in this country. And this speaker series is going to be a huge part of that. I am so thrilled that I have the honor of introducing my friend, the Honorable Eric Holder. Now, his bio is in your book, and so I won't bore you with the stuff that you probably already know. You know that he graduated from Columbia. You know that he was an incredible judge on the Superior Court. You know that he served in the Department of Justice as the Deputy Attorney General, now the Associate Attorney General. You know that he was the 82nd Attorney General of the United States. You know that he's been a partner at the law firm of Covington and Burling. All of those things are extraordinary, but they are not really extraordinary unless you know some other things. Unless you know that he is a son of immigrants from Barbados, unless you know that he grew up in a modest neighborhood in Queens, New York, that his father, like so many immigrants, loved and believed in this country enough to join the military, that his mother was a telephone operator, that he is a product of the public schools of New York, that after his first year of law school, he served as a summer clerk at the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and that the following year he served as a clerk at the Department of Justice. And we will talk about why he chose justice over LDF at some other time. But we have always claimed him. And if you go on websites, even DOJ websites, and you see his bio, he will include the fact that he was at LDF. And we have given him permission to remove it because he's done some other things since his first summer of law school. But we're very proud that he keeps it on there. And I think the reason he does is because the LDF family is a little bit like a mafia family without the crime. And by that, I mean that once you're in the family, we look out for you. We don't let anybody talk against you. We might pull you up, but you can't talk against him in my presence. And so he remains a member of that family. It's not enough to say that he was the 82nd Attorney General of the United States, because we're in a time in this country when many people wonder whether it matters that we have diversity in positions of high authority and power. What I know is that the weekend after Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri, I called the Attorney General, who was at that time not my friend. And we sent him a letter. Monique Dixon is sitting right behind the Attorney General. She was then the head of our criminal justice policy at LDF, now teaches at Maryland Law School. And we sent him a letter. And the letter said that we wanted to meet with him, that this was not a one-off. And we included in that letter, just from the top of our heads, 10 other examples of unarmed Black men who had been killed by police and no one had been punished for it. And he said, sure, come by. So we came, about 4 of us. We came into his office. We sat around Robert Kennedy's desk with the Attorney General, and we talked about what the Department of Justice could do to marshal its resources to address this crisis. And of course, we took pictures, but he listened to us. And that began the beginning of our friendship and our relationship. It was the responsiveness that he showed to the people for whom the Justice Department was created. And I think many people either forget this or don't realize it. It's great that you all do antitrust and all those other things at the Justice Department, but it was created in 1870 to create a federal law enforcement agency to protect the civil rights of Black people. That is why the Department of Justice was created. And so when Attorney General Holder would receive us and would partner with us, he was fulfilling the core and original mission of the Department of Justice. And I have seen many attorney generals in that role, and I have had a relationship with a number of them, but I've never quite had a relationship with attorney generals like I had with Attorney General Holder. The day of the Shelby County decision, the decision in which the Supreme Court really gutted a key section of the Voting Rights Act, we're at the Supreme Court. We heard the announcement of the decision. We were all devastated, of course. And Attorney General Holder reached out to a number of the civil rights leaders who were working on voting rights issues, and he asked us to come to the office. And so that afternoon, we made our way over to the Justice Department, and once again, we sat around the table, and he pledged and committed that the resources of the Civil Rights Division, of the Voting Rights Division of the Justice Department would continue, that he would not pull back on staff, and that that staff would be committed to stepping up their protection of voting rights using the other tools in the Voting Rights Act that were available to us. There were moments during my tenure leading LDF when this country was erupting in profound concerns about policing. And sometimes we forget who was in charge during those periods. Certainly Barack Obama was in charge for a good part of that time. But you'll remember that there were calls for more information, for people to go to Ferguson, to investigate the Ferguson Police Department. And even though the Department of Justice has had that power since 1995 to engage in pattern and practice investigations, we did not begin to see near the level of pattern and practice investigations that we should see until this man was Attorney General. And because of his investigation of the Ferguson Police Department and its criminal justice practices, we learned that there are communities throughout this country where policing is used as a form of raising money to support the coffers of the town. We learned not only about the racial disparities in the stops that were being made, but we learned about the ticketing and the fines and fees that were being levied on poor people in order to hold up the coffers of the town. That report was a landmark report because that is the kind of report that shows us what ails our democracy. And we are now in a moment of democratic crisis. And Eric Holder has been essential to our ability to confront that crisis. When he left the Attorney General's office, he went to a law firm. Most people do who leave the Attorney General's office. But he also formed the National Democratic Redistricting Commission to address the issue of gerrymandering. And they have been doing extraordinary work, bringing cases shoulder to shoulder with civil rights organizations challenging gerrymandering. But when there were two young Black men, legislators, who were being barred from their service by the Speaker of the Tennessee legislature, and these two young Black men, and a white woman who, with them, had been protesting against gun violence and demanding gun safety laws. And they were kicked out of the seats they had been elected to by the Speaker. One of those young men called me repeatedly. And I kept thinking he had a lawyer, because how could he not have a lawyer? But he said he didn't have a lawyer and that he needed help. And so I helped him when he made his speech, but I knew who I had to call. He needed a lawyer. And so I called Eric Holder. And it was Eric Holder and his firm that represented that young man that sent one of those very, very scary demand letters to the Speaker of the House to say not only must they be seated, but they must also receive their committee assignments. And that is how, at that time, I think we were hearing that the Speaker was going to try to keep them from even being able to run again. And after he got that letter from Eric and his firm, the Speaker stood down on that. And those young men were elected again in a special election and returned to the Tennessee House. These are things that are not in the paper. You don't know that he's behind those things. But I know that when there is some civil rights issue happening in this country that requires big guns, that requires a masked head with lots of names, and somebody who has a heart and passion for civil rights, and who is fighting tooth and nail for this democracy, this is the man I call. I'm so proud to call him a friend, but also so proud of the commitment he has made in his life to this work, and really proud that I feel incredibly optimistic about what we're gonna do over the next few years. And he's a little bit older than I, and so if he has energy, I have energy. So we're gonna do this fight. Come on up here.
You know, it's interesting that in her introduction, I almost felt like we had a lecture, you know? It's like, I could just like sit down and say, well, did you all enjoy the lecture? It was, thank you, Sherilyn. It's, you are indeed a friend, but she's also a person who you never want to say no to, you know? And so a request from Sherilyn Eiffel is really more like a direction to do something, you know? And I'm proud to call her a friend and a colleague. And it also shows, you know, she mentioned that I did clerk at the Legal Defense Fund for that summer. And that shows the strength of that organization. It survived the summer of Eric. It continues to be a vital part of our civil rights community. I understand that we have over a dozen judges attending from the U.S. District Court, Supreme Court of Maryland, the Appellate Court, and District Court. I want to say hi to all the judges who are here. Number of law professors from the University of Maryland, Georgetown, Howard, University of Baltimore. Number of elected officials as well. Brooke Learman, the controller of the state of Maryland, Ivan Bates, the city state's attorney, possibly the Attorney General, Brown, I don't know if he's here or not, and local elected officials. A lot of community leaders who are attending, including the heads of foundations. Eric Barron, the U.S. Attorney for the District of Maryland, I understand is here. Oh, there you go, okay. Juliet Urick, where are you? Here. There you go. Well, no, she worked with me at the Justice Department. It's great to see you, all right? That's a personal, it's me and Juliet, all right. David Wilson, the president of Morgan State University. Judges, retired judges, Andre Davis and Alexander Williams, you guys look way too young to be retired. I mean, I'm like, like I'm looking at you, that's what I picture up there. I'm like, I'm the old guys. Like, you all, so thank you all so much. Law school deans Renee Hutchins and LaVonda Reed. Taylor Branch, a person who I call a friend and to whom I think this nation owes so much. You speak truth. So it's good to have you all here, and I'm really glad to be here. It's a pleasure to join so many public servants, members of the legal community, distinguished scholars, community activists, good friends, as we celebrate, I think, an extraordinary jurist and the values that motivated him, as we lift up the ideals that he strove to uphold, and as we recommit ourselves to his unfinished work, and also to our own unfinished work. In particular, I want to thank the Reverend Dr. Alvin Hathaway for his leadership. Yes. For his leadership of the beloved Community Services Corporation. The work that you do every day is really extraordinary. Through your programs, you are providing social, economic, and health-related support across the city of Baltimore, and you lift up this community and its citizens. And your efforts to restore and rehabilitate historic sites in Baltimore, including the building in which we stand today, I help bring history to life and renew history's promise. It allows us, as you have said, to stand on the shoulders of our ancestors, to enjoy borrowed blessings, and to find opportunities to pay these blessings forward. Thank you, sir. The life of Justice Thurgood Marshall is one of exceptional scope and also of breathtaking progress. The law school applicant, rejected because of his race, who went on to bring down legalized segregation. The great-grandson of a slave, the son of a steward at a whites-only country club who became a justice of the United States Supreme Court. The brilliant lawyer who never lost sight of the impact of the law and the meaning of its protection to the people that it served. Now, that impact is real, and it's something that I know firsthand. As Sherilyn said, my father emigrated to this country from Barbados, which is the pearl of the Caribbean. All you Jamaicans, and Trinidadians, St. Lucians, comes from Barbados as a young man. When he was almost 40 years old, he enlisted in the military during the Second World War. He wanted to stand against fascism, to stand up for his adopted country, and to fight for the freedom and democracy that America promised. And while he was serving in that war, while he was wearing the uniform of the country that he promised to defend, he was told to leave a train card that was reserved for whites only, while he was in uniform during war. Now, when I was a kid, schools and other public accommodations could legally refuse entry to men like my father. And stories like his, and many much worse, were commonplace. Yet because of Thurgood Marshall, because of the court that heard his case and decided in his favor, and because of the men and women who sat in, who stood up and spoke out, that kind of state-sanctioned discrimination was struck down. And in the space of really one generation, that devoted soldier's son rose to become the 82nd Attorney General of the United States of America, first Black Attorney General serving in the administration of the first Black president to occupy the Oval Office. Now, that arc was not simple, nor straightforward. As so many of you may have experienced firsthand, this country has long had and continues to have a complicated relationship with equality, especially with race. I have certainly seen in my own life how attempts have been made to make someone like me made to feel powerless, whatever my position. I remember my father sitting down with me to have a conversation about how, as a young Black man, I should interact with the police if I was ever stopped or confronted in a way that I thought was unwarranted. I'll never forget the frustration I felt at being pulled over twice as my car was searched from the New Jersey Turnpike, even though I'm sure I wasn't speeding. Now, I was driving a 1971 Plymouth Duster. Now, that car was incapable of speeding. But I also remember the humiliation of being stopped by a police officer while simply running to catch a movie at night in Georgetown in Washington, D.C. Even though at the time I was a federal prosecutor. or the sense of grim resignation after the murder of Trayvon Martin, when I had to sit down and have that same conversation with my son that my father had once had with me. Now, I carry those experiences with me, not out of bitterness or resentment, but as a reminder of the space that still exists between what is and what ought to be. But we have made great progress. Though America is far more fair than the country that existed when that soldier was told to get out of a train car, the United States is still too negatively race conscious and not at the place with our founding words. We're not yet a nation of full equality or real justice. I've tried to follow the words of Dr. King and help bend that arc of the moral universe further towards justice. As Attorney General, I tried to advance the idea that is at the heart and soul of our democracy, the notion that every person deserves the equal protection of the law and an equal opportunity to exercise their rights. Over the course of my 6 years in leading the department, we tried to work to ensure the equality under the law was protected by the law. We took on issues of profound racial inequity and criminal justice, replacing tough on crime with smart on crime, and working to end that vicious cycle of poverty, criminality, and incarceration that puts too many Black Americans in too many prisons for far too long and for no truly good law enforcement reason. We stood up for communities of color that faced discrimination in housing, education, employment, and financial services, working to help those who had been abused and to shut down institutions that preyed on the poor. We fought for fair access to the ballot box, calling for an end to felon disenfranchisement, because Black Americans had been disproportionately and unfairly convicted of crimes, bringing aggressive legal action against states that enacted draconian and unnecessary voter ID laws, really aimed at suppression instead of suffrage, and standing up against voting restrictions, even after a deeply flawed Supreme Court decision in the Shelby County case in 2013 undermined the Voting Rights Act. Now, in all these areas, we talk on discrimination that has festered in this country for more than 4 centuries, since the date of the original sin, when a slave ship carrying more than 20 kidnapped and trafficked Angolans arrived in Jamestown in 1619. We fought the dehumanization that is woven throughout our history, from the stain of slavery to the strange fruit of Jim Crow, from massive resistance to the stand in the schoolhouse door, from bloody attacks on a bridge in Selma to the murders of Black men, women, and children by people entrusted to keep them safe. We spoke out against the tendency towards the inertia that has allowed the cancer of racism to metastasize within our laws and our institutions. We operated with a simple understanding that justice is not an abstract theory. It's a living and breathing principle. It's about how our laws impact our daily experiences and whether we live up to our promise as a nation and as a people. So I'm proud of the actions that we took to advance opportunity and to ensure justice for all. We made important progress, and we laid the groundwork for more to come. Again, there's little doubt that our country has traveled a long way on the road to equality. We have made progress. But here's the deal. Progress is not a goal. It is a measure of commitment. It's a marker in time, and it must be built on the foundation of hard truth. We don't work for progress. We struggle for the end states of equality and justice. But today, the hard truth is that while this country has taken meaningful steps forward, we can no longer be content with this notion of stuttering, incremental progress. The hard truth is that on major questions of race, policing, justice, education, democracy, and equality under law, progress too often masks the reality that we're still mired in the struggles of a bygone century. I mean, how much longer must we wait to reach that truly free and equitable end state? How much further before we reach the promised land? How distant remains that elusive ideal that draws immigrants to our shores? How near is that more perfect union our founders envisioned and left us the humble tools to create together? My friends, this occasion is not just a time to look back about a great man, but to set a course for the future. And we can no longer afford to be patient. In the 1980s, a reporter asked the great James Baldwin about the pace of change since the civil rights era. It This is what he said. What is it you wanted me to reconcile myself to? I was born here almost 60 years ago. I'm not going to live another 60 years. You always told me it takes time. Well, it's taken my father's time, my mother's time, my uncle's time, my brother's time, my sister's time. How much time do you want for your progress? And as Justice Marshall once said, we need to stop talking about how far we've come and start talking about how close we are. And the simple answer is we're not close enough. Now, there's no denying that this struggle is far from over. Critical work remains unfinished. And it's a sad reality that in some areas, we're in danger of turning backwards. Today, we face a backlash of bigotry that has turned diversity, equity, and inclusion into a slur. We face a slew of voting restrictions and gerrymanders across the country that have attempted to weaken voting rights, especially among Black Americans and communities of color. We face a Supreme Court that has been packed with situational originalists who have waved away decades of precedent in cases from Shelby County to Dobbs and just made stuff up in the presidential immunity case. I mean, you just made that up, all in order to achieve ideological goals. Now, there are real injustices from these justices. We cannot ignore these injustices. We must not accept them. Instead, we have to let ourselves feel them and then fight for that. See? And then fight for that which is right. By working to heal communities that have been torn apart by bigotry, by speaking out against discrimination where and when it occurs, by exercising our right to vote, and working with organizations like the one that I had, the National Democratic Redistricting Committee, to expand voting rights, promote fair match, and ensure that every eligible voter in this country can make their voice heard. By refusing to let someone else's problem, someone else's challenge, someone else's burden be theirs alone. Justice Marshall had many gifts. He was a brilliant thinker, an eloquent speaker, a persuasive lawyer. But in my view, his greatest gift was his empathy. He knew at a very personal level what it meant to face discrimination. He had seen throughout his life and career the struggles of the poor and disenfranchised. And he remembered, he didn't forget, he remembered to his last day on the Supreme Court the capacity of the law to transform the rights, opportunities, and expectations of Americans. That lived experience is what made him not only a remarkable figure, but an effective practitioner of the law, motivated to take on big challenges and be aggressive in rooting out injustice. Now, that's an approach to jurisprudence there is an approach to jurisprudence that views the law as static. The law simply is, and it is up to lawyers to push for it, judges to interpret it, and executives to apply it. It's an approach that for years allowed Supreme Court justice nominees to say, I think disingenuously, that they saw their role as nothing more than that of an umpire, calling balls and strikes. But I don't see it that way. I see the law in the same way that Thurgood Marshall did, as a mechanism to improve lives, to right wrongs, to heal wounds, and to achieve justice. I see our individual experiences not as biases that need to be cast aside, but as opportunities to recognize the humanity of others and to access empathy for those who are struggling. I believe that empathy makes us better lawyers, better judges, better activists, and better citizens. And I see our responsibility not only to apply the law, but to be active participants in the work of building a more fair, equal, and beloved community. Now, for those of you who are lawyers or expect to become attorneys, I hope that you're going to ask yourselves, what would Justice Marshall think of the state of our judiciary today? More importantly, what would Mr. Civil Rights do? And what can you do to give life to a system that evaluates cases in a manner consistent with existing law and long precedent, protects the rights of citizens, and grounds decisions in our current and lived reality? For those of you who are working in politics and community service, I hope that you will ask yourselves, how would Justice Marshall see our challenges through the lens of his own experience? And how can you apply your experience, your understanding, your energy, and your empathy to bring us closer again to those founding ideals? No matter who you are, I hope that you will take action beginning by exercising, this is the most basic thing in the world, your right to vote. And then by going further and committing yourself to the solutions for the challenges of our time. That is the opportunity and the obligation that we all have in front of us. It's up to each of us to make our better future possible. It's up to every one of us to exercise the full measure of our citizenship, to make sure that others have that same right. And it is up to all of us to do our part to forge the stronger democracy and build a more just society. That always has to be our goal. That's the way this nation has made progress in nearly 2.5 centuries, not by some inevitable hand of fate, but by the actions of regular people who saw something wrong and committed to making it right. From the framers of a revolution to the engineers of emancipation, from women walking for suffrage to the marchers in Selma, from the abolitionists who asked, "Ain't I a woman?" to a young boy in Baltimore bound for the Supreme Court. Generation after generation, this country has been built, rebuilt, enriched, and improved both by and for the people. And that slow progress has transformed real lives. It's an idea that Justice Marshall well understood, that each of us has a claim to a fair and equitable country. Each of us has a responsibility to make that country real. And always remember, positive change is not promised. It is the result of hard work, great sacrifice, and focused commitment. Always understand, there will be opposition that must be overcome. There will be people who will reflexively defend the status quo. There will be too many unwilling to acknowledge the injustices of the past and their impact on the present. There will be ideologues who think that the acquisition and maintenance of power, that no deed is wrong. Now, the struggle will not be easy. It never has been. But a focused and committed people have always brought about the change that they sought. So as we take this moment to celebrate Justice Marshall's life, I call on all of you here today to recommit yourselves to his legacy by taking real action on voting rights for every person in every community, by pressing for equality of opportunity in every situation, in every circumstance, by lending a hand to people who are too often let down, left out, and left behind, by answering the call to finish that march towards justice and the more perfect union that he helped to imagine. We have within us the ability to do all of this. Never lose sight of that. We have within ourselves the capacity for the kind of change that we all desire, the kind of change that Thurgood Marshall dedicated his life to. We have the ability to do that if we will put the effort towards it. So I want to thank you all again for having me here today. I want to thank you all for your passion and for your commitment. And I want to thank you in advance for all that you will do to achieve the promise of our nation. Thanks very much.
I just want to offer a few words of thanks. I have about 6 things I want to thank. I can usually only remember 3 things, so I hope that I do everyone justice who needs to be thanked. But of course, I have to begin with Attorney General Holder. Thank you for delivering an inspiring, inaugural Justice Thurgood Marshall lecture. We set our sights very high for this first lecture. We were thrilled when you accepted, and you have done a wonderful job of delivering incredible remarks, so thank you. Of course, I have to thank our sponsors, the 14 law firms that have supported this lecture, and I hope there will be more, and the many individuals who have also stepped up. You believed in this idea and you helped us launch this, and we are deeply grateful. All of the names of our sponsors are in your program. I also need to thank the organizing committee and the selection committee. The organizing committee of really putting this together, the selection committee, importantly, of finding our speaker and making sure that we are achieving the goal of having a terrific talk each year. Of course, we'll thank the staff who worked on this. We are all volunteers here, but Moran Finney's group, Jean Marie Patella, Shara Boonshaft from the University of Maryland Law School. I'm not going to attempt the whole name. We're all volunteers, and this has been a labor of love, and everyone's worked really hard to make this happen. I do want to add a word of thanks to the University of Maryland, which is now the home of our endowment for the Justice Thurgood Marshall Lecture, and has helped get that started. Finally, I'm going to thank the audience. We asked you to come, you came, and we're thrilled that you're here to hear this. You are now on our list, so you will be invited back next year, and I hope to see you all here next year. And my last word of thanks is to my husband, Jim. 2 years ago, we stood in this space before it was renovated, and he could see the promise here. He looked around this room and said, how are you going to use this space? How will you animate this space? And he said, I think you need a lecture. I think you need a lecture that will honor Justice Marshall. In my marriage, Jim is vision, I'm execution. That creates certain tensions sometimes. But he was the vision, it was his idea, and I do think we need to give him credit. And that concludes our program. Thank you so much for being here tonight.